saw a great commercial yesterday for extra chewing gum. And, I don't know if you've seen it, but it was absolutely hilarious. It was basically like all of these people with horrible hair and terrible self-grooming, kind of waking up from under piles of debris in their apartments and being like, wait, we can go outside again, and reaching for packs of extra spearmint gum to go and like freshen their breath so that they could actually interact with other human beings for the first time. And it was this weird mix of these sort of like zombie-esque people who were like beyond jubilant, just like leaping through the streets and like down on park benches and like just couldn't believe they were free. And it was really funny. It was really good.
That's awesome. I love the positivity of that approach. And it's such a wonderful thing, to find humor in the heavy, isn't it? It's to get it right as well is an art unto itself.
Yeah, I think so.
And on not necessarily that note, but at that moment, welcome to Hard Degree and welcome to Evangeline Lilly's Library of the Soul. This is week 3, and we have a real treat this week, actually, which is we will be talking about The Red Tent by Anita Diamant. Am I pronouncing her name correctly?
I have no idea. I say Diamant, but that's
Diamant, yeah.
But she's not French, and she, I think she's of Jewish heritage. And
she is for sure.
It's probably wrong also. I grew up in French immersion, so whenever I see new words, my brain still has that sort of elementary school training to pronounce them in the French way. So I actually don't know. I say Diamant, but maybe it's Diamant.
Well, that's part of the fun. I'm going to dedicate myself over the next week to finding out because I've slipped into this. You've placed me in this non-research zone. I haven't gone and looked at any footage of her or seen her talk about the book or anything. By the way, I am, of course, here with the one, the only, Evangeline Brains Lilly, who today, Brains is actually rocking her Brains glasses and a very fetching sky blue scarf, which matches it very nicely. Have you got things going on with your hair, Brains? Is that what's going on? Are you beginning to transform it?
Of a mini grow out, not like a full grow out, but like a mini grow out. And I'm sort of like at that awkward stage where if I don't put a kerchief over my head when it's wet, it just gets too big. And I kind of look like a Q-tip. I don't know if you guys
have absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah.
Are you sort of getting it into Hope Van Dyne shape? Is that the deal?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah. So is that something you can't talk about?
I can't talk about anything.
Can't even get into that stuff. Yeah.
No way.
So you can't even talk about what your hairstyle is going to be in the movie.
Oh no. No. Actually, on the first film, I was familiar with lockdown secrecy from Lost. That was the beginning of the sort of new age of Hollywood being on lockdown secrecy all the time because the internet was hungry for scripts and hungry for information, and Twitter had just become a thing. And it's crazy to think that like when I started my adult career, Twitter didn't even exist. Anyway, but so I was familiar with lockdown secrecy, but I had always been very reticent about it. I'd always been very irritated by the whole thing because I just felt like this isn't heart surgery. These aren't like geopolitical secrets that are going to keep the world safe. Like it's a fucking TV show, excuse my French, but really, like, do we really have to be so militant about the secrecy? And so when we started on Ant-Man, I knew that it was secret, but I was just like, it's cool though. They're gonna people are gonna see me on social media and maybe like paparazzi pictures and things with the haircut I'm gonna have for the movie before the movie comes out. So it's fine. So when we did the haircut, I released a picture on Instagram of like, check out my new Hope Van Dyne haircut. And oh my God, I got in so much trouble. I got in so much trouble. And I was like, okay, I was such a scolded, like wounded little puppy after that. Like, I'm sorry. So yeah, no discussion about it.
I'm asking the worst kind of $64,000 question.
Yes, exactly.
So before we depart the world of haircuts, in the first Ant-Man, that rather brutal bob that you had, was that you, or was that a wig?
Everyone thinks it's a wig. It's my hair.
Wow, amazing. I always thought it was a wig. That's what I'm asking. Yeah.
Well, it's because I have extremely thick hair. Like I have a lot of hair. And actually in this, they got so much attention that people really thought I was wearing a wig that in the second film, I had my hairdresser thin my hair to make it look like what other people think is real hair.
Yeah.
Because my hair is really, really thick. And so it's sort of not as noticeable when I have long hair because you're sort of used to the idea of long hair being tons of hair. Yeah. But when it was short like that in that bob, everyone thought, guarantee it was a wig. I have dispelled this myth about 100 times and I still can't get ahead of it. Like everyone is convinced it was a wig. So yeah, no, that was my hair.
Well, I think because everybody just looks at the image or, looks at the footage of the movie and it's like, oh yeah, okay, of course, has to be. Of course it is. Yeah. That's all. I mean, until you looked me in the eyes and told me that, I honestly thought that was the case. Amazing. Amazing. Now, to flip onto the subject of today's Library of the Soul, I'm really fascinated by what the red tent is, and because it made me do a bunch of things that I'd never done before. One of which was read the Old Testament. Yeah, because I've the closest I've ever got to the Old Testament is the rock group, the 70s progressive rock band Genesis's first album. It's called From Genesis to Revelation. That's how they get the name. That's as much as I know about the Old Testament. And of course, once I was reading the Red Tent, I was like, man, I'm going to have to read this famous chapter 34 of Genesis to see what goes on. And we'll get into the fabric of that. My question for you, which we kind of always start with, is where were you and what was happening in your life when you encountered this book?
So if anybody's been listening for the previous 2 or 3 episodes, we sort of walked me from being a broke, kind of lost university student to launching to fame on Lost, and then actually becoming, ironically, even more lost in my spiritual walk than I'd ever been, and having a bit of an existential crisis. And this book came to me in 2010. And by that time, I had wrapped on Lost. We had finished the entire show. And in the last season, I had fallen in love with the man that I'm still with today. And I had decided to have his baby. And he was an AD, which is an assistant director, which is kind of it's a fancy way of saying the guys that essentially run the set. So just keep all of the crew doing what they're supposed to be doing and keep all the wheels greased and make sure everyone's where they're supposed to be, and so that the machine just keeps moving. It's a really intense job, and it is really long hours. It's like 18 hours a day, 5 to 6 days, sometimes 7 days a week. And that's what my partner did. And so I was pregnant and he was off working all the time. And then his one day off had always been devoted to fishing. He's an avid fisherman. Yeah. And I was like, I don't want to take that away from you. So he was basically non-existent. Like I just wasn't around at all. And I was still in Hawaii. And so I didn't have any of my family around either. And I've always been very reclusive. So I've never had very much of a social life or very many friends. So I spent the good part of that pregnancy doing yoga and like going for long walks and reading. And this book was one of the books that I read while I was pregnant with my first son. And actually in a crazy, ironic, strange, beautiful, miraculous, of course, twist of fate, Jupiter entered Pisces when I picked this book back up after our last session a week ago. So on May 13th. And if you talk to astrologists, they would say that in order to understand how Jupiter in Pisces will manifest for you on a personal level, look back to the themes that were prevalent in your life back in 2010.
Wow.
And which I thought was amazing, because 2010, not only was I reading this book for the first time, this is now my third time reading it, but I picked it up again. But I also, throughout this past week, was in a terrifying pregnancy scare. For the last week, I've thought I was pregnant.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, I was so freaked out because I do not want to be pregnant right now. I'm on my way to go do another Marvel movie. I have 2 strapping boys who are like, if I was pregnant right now, my youngest would be 6 years older than my baby. And like, I just was, that is not where I'm at in life. I really don't want this to happen, but it was really like on my mind and on my heart. So when I read that about Jupiter entering Pisces right now, I was like, holy shit, this is amazing. Especially because what it does is it sort of like linked themes that became new for me when I read The Red Tent. Themes of, first of all, the impact of the moon on a woman's life and soul, which was completely brand new to me. And I don't even know if at that point I'd put 2 and 2 together that women actually menstruate with moon cycles. Like, I don't think I'd even realized that. And then also just this notion of the goddess, of the female spiritual energy, of the distinctly female deities or energies that exist in the world that have been so dramatically suppressed through the patriarchy. That was all introduced to me really. I mean, I guess it had already come in dribbles because I had a roommate who was super into astrology. She was like a Brazilian. I called her my little witch, and I just, in the most loving way. I mean, she was a total witch, like just manifesting shit all over the place and, really, really sexually free. And she was just an amazing woman and is still my friend to this day. So she had sort of first introduced me to astrology, but more in that space of like personality assessing kind of stuff. And I'd been interested. I thought it was interesting, but I never really put a ton of stock into it. And this book was the first time I think I started to realize that there was an energy that was in me that I had never been offered the opportunity to experience or to commune with or be one with, because my God up to then had always been God the Father, God the Son, God the Lion, God the Sovereign, God the male, the patriarch, the male. And I'd never connected to the loss of, where is God the Mother? Where is my female energy that is eternal and beautiful and worthy of worship, or worthy of at least acknowledgement?
Yeah, that's so I get that, and that must have been quite a powerful piece of narrative to read then, given the fact that you're at that place at that juncture with that perspective.
Yeah, with my first baby in my womb.
Yeah.
Which is already an enormous shift for a woman, for any woman. And I think already what it does, without, whether you can put words to it or not, I think that when you become pregnant, you immediately connect to that energy that is described so beautifully and so graphically and so poetically in this book. And so the synchronicity of having that experience internally and then being given these words, and also this history, because it's historical fiction. So Anita has based all of this in intensive research about what a woman's life would have been like in Israel at that time, at that place, in Canaan, for a shepherd's wife. Like she did her research. So a lot of this is based not just on, actually, in a way, I actually think it's sort of a counterbalance to the Old Testament and biblical truth. But like, I was interested to see, because I kept, I was reading it again, and this happens every time I read it, where I kind of get like a little glee or a little smirk or a little pleasure when she kind of dismantles something I've been told, I've read in the Bible 100 times, or I've been taught in Sunday school 1,000,000 times, and it's been told to me in a certain way, with a certain kind of tone and narrative and suggestion, like underneath it. And then in some of these scenes where sorry, I'm just going to tell my kids to be more quiet.
It's good. It's cool.
Hey, honey, too loud. I'm doing my podcast. Thank you.
That's the affirmative power of the mother right there.
There you go.
Stop. Boom. Done.
And it was the first time in all of our podcasts that my children have in any way impacted the podcast, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was thinking exactly that. Isn't it funny that you should be literally talking about motherhood when that comes up?
Yeah, exactly. I love those things. Those are, for me, that is God. Like, that's the magic. And that's why I love being alive, because I see magic everywhere. I just see synchronicity and coincidence and like just crazy alignment of things all the time, where I go, this is like somebody's fucking with me in the best way. There's like a mischievous energy to what is happening all the time. And I love that kind of wink and nudge of like, we're here.
Yeah.
There's more at work than meets the eye. And I'm like, ooh, that feels really good. Like, that makes me feel quite, in a weird way, quite loved.
Yes. Yeah. I agree with that. That is also, while I might have ascribed different reasons for it or different energies to it being the case, that's also my experience of life. And I think it's worth digressing just to talk about that for a sec, because I too have had so many of those experiences where I remember walking down a tube station in the East End of London once, and I was thinking about a guy that I'd been to. I originally went to law school before I did my English and journalism stuff, and I got kicked out of law school for drinking too much and not doing any work. Hey, kicked out. That's right. That's the only value of law school in my mind, is to be kicked out of it, to be honest, because the law wasn't for me. I found it to be very, very dull. Yeah, exactly. But I was thinking of this guy who's a really cool bloke who became a travel photographer. He finished his law degree, but he never used it. Became a travel photographer. He's from Hong Kong, and I was thinking about him. It had probably been 11 years since I'd seen him or spoken to him at all. We were very close at one point, and I'm walking down this tube station in East London, just thinking about him. And it's called Aldwych, and as I get to a certain point, somebody just shouts out Sumner, and I'll look up, and it's him, Amar, standing right there. I mean, I was literally thinking about him for the first time in a decade, and it was like, what? It was like one of those absolute what the fuck moments. But that has happened to me countless times. And it's so unusual. I mean, I've had funny things happen where I've met people and they're adamant that they know who I am, and I just do not know who they are. And then as they explain the story of why they think they know me, it's always based on some kind of connection. Not, I know a friend of yours and I've seen your photo. It's like, well, deconstruct why you think it is, and then some of it comes just completely out of nowhere. And I think that's a truly beautiful thing about life, and it is absolutely a very real energy. And how many times do you sit there and think, oh man, I really think it would be cool if X, Y, Z happened, and then some echo or shadow or foretelling or roadmap to that happening just drops into your lap.
Yes, absolutely. I see that energy, and when those things happen, I used to find myself just in awe and sort of humbled, of like this energy, this presence, this something that is at work. And now what is incredible is there's been a shift with age and time and experience and maturity, where I've started to feel both the awe and the humility and the just sort of mystery of it. But then I've also felt this really intimate feeling or recognition of like, that is what it means to be loved, is that somewhere there's something at work that cares enough to pay attention to my life, that cares enough to somehow be connected to my life or at work in my life, so that when I think a thought, an answer comes back, something comes back. When I think about a friend I haven't seen in 10 years, that friend appears. Or, when I dream a dream and wake up and realize it's given me an answer I've been asking for 3 weeks, or things like that. And there's a way that it can be extremely abstract in the way that I hard agree how you explained your perspective of God last episode, where you talked about this sort of undefinable interconnectedness of things that we can't even grasp with our puny little brains. But then there's also the intimate version of it, where if you choose it, and I do choose to feel like, wow, like I received that. And wherever that came from, it was pure. And whatever that pure energy is that it came from, just gave it to me. And that feels like, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not purposeless. It's not empty. This void isn't just chaos. There's meaning and love and wonder and wisdom to be had. And like, all I have to do is just walk truthfully and with openness, and just be like, show me, take me wherever, whatever. And then it just starts happening. Like magic just starts to kind of manifest in my life.
Yeah, I really couldn't hard agree more on that point, because it's about specificity, right? The world can't be chaos as much as I'm attracted to the concepts of chaos, particularly when it comes to narrative and storytelling. And you look at the dismaying things in the world, genuinely dismaying things in the world, and there is clearly a ton of chaos that abounds. But that's not all that life is. There is too much that's very specific going on. And it's exactly as you say, that there's too much that's redolent of some kind of pattern for each human being, because everybody has these moments that it's not chance. What's happening in those moments isn't chance. Something very specific to you is being accessed. And I hear these stories time and time again from all different kinds of people in all different walks of life at all different points in their lives. But it's almost nobody has a story where something like that has never happened to them. Even it's somebody who's incredibly pragmatic, like my own dad, when he sits down and recounts stories about his life, ultimately these moments of incredible symmetry come up. He doesn't recognize them as that because it's not the primary way he thinks. And I'll go, Dad, just take that back for a second. Don't you think it's fascinating that X, Y, or Z, right? And he'll be like, oh, yeah, I've never thought about it that way. And it's just really fascinating. And to kind of continue this riff for a second, something that's interesting about my dad is he's a retired financial guy. He was a bank manager, and some of the accounts that he had in Liverpool, he was the bank manager of a bunch of well-known people who were connected in the music industry. So there's a very famous guy from the Merseybeat era, one of the big Liverpool bands of the 60s that wasn't the Beatles, is Jerry Marsden and the Pacemakers. They had a big hit called Ferry Cross the Mersey. They had a big hit with You'll Never Walk Alone from the musical Carousel. And that's their recording of that has become the theme tune for a bunch of really big international sports teams. Liverpool Football Club, Soccer Club being one of them. One of the big teams in America uses it as well. But anyway, this guy is kind of a legendary music figure in the UK. And my dad was his bank manager, right? But my dad's only ever mentioned that in passing when he is talking about his life, because to him, somebody who's wasn't really into that whole music scene, all of these stories that involve those people, that Dad will sit and listen to a whole person's anecdote. They're going, oh my God, I got to meet Jerry Marsden once, blah, 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 blah. And Dad will be, yeah, that's amazing. I hear, he's a very nice guy, blah, blah, blah. It's so good he had that experience. And as we're walking, I'll be going, oh, my dad was Jerry Marsden's bank manager. And he won't even say it, and those normal moments where you're like, oh, it's so important to me, and I remember telling friends of mine I'd known my whole life growing up with them. I told an old schoolmate of mine about 2 weeks ago, oh yeah, my dad was Jerry Marsden's bank manager. He's the bank managers for the Epstein family, the manager of the Beatles. And he was like, what? I lived next door to you for 70 years. I've never heard that story. And it's about, and Dad doesn't even access what a conversation opener, what a door opener that story actually is, that tale of his life actually is. And the reason I was thinking about this with reference to just that weird, the symmetry, the specificity of things, is that Jerry's a person who turned up in my dad's life at strange moments. There's a well-known children's cartoon in the UK called Mr. Ben. It's for preschool kids. And the premise is Mr. Ben, who looks like a classic English gentleman, bowler hat, three-piece suit, umbrella, walks into the local costume shop. And the guy who owns the costume shop is a guy with a fez on. Yeah, goes, oh, Mr. Ben, you're back. Would you like to come through here? I've got a costume for you to try on. And Mr. Ben puts on whatever the costume is. it's a knight, it's an astronaut, it's a magician, right? And he goes out, he puts the costume on, he goes out through the other door of the changing room, and he has an adventure on Mars with a bunch of astronauts, or he goes back to the Arthurian era, right? And then right at the end, and this is my point, I guess, is that as the adventure concludes, suddenly the little man with the fez appears and goes, "Oh, Mr. Ben, this way," and he takes him through a portal which takes him back into the changing room, and Mr. Ben changes back out of his outfit into his three-piece suit, says goodbye to the man in the changing room, and that's it. He doesn't go, "Holy fuck, I can't believe I've just had this adventure with Mars."
Very English.
And it's all so genteel and polite, and these amazing things are happening, and people are just thinking not to mention them. That is a very English thing. But also, this is why I think sometimes people are faced with this kind of amazing magic in their lives. And because of the nature of some societies and the way that works, the more kind of measured Western cultures, a lot of people don't even mention the amazing things that happen to them. It's only when you really dig into them. I know, and I reference my dad because he's this kind of guy. He's a wonderful person, but you have to dig in with my father and ask him those questions, and then he'll tell you. But he won't ever think to share it with you. He won't even think it's story worthy. If that makes sense.
Even the flip side of life, the dark side of life, the shadow side of life. Yeah. One of the things that happens in the red tent is whenever there is a death of anybody, the women start in on a wailing, a communal wailing, and they do it openly, and they do it loudly, and they do it together. And I was really struck by that. I've seen, I think, versions or examples of that through movies from Middle Eastern culture.
Yeah.
Of this harrowing sound that sometimes it's just the women, sometimes it's the women and the men.
Yeah.
And I recently had a friend whose husband committed suicide unexpectedly. And I was so bereft, and yet I felt like in our culture, there is no appropriate way to express that. There is no place to put that. And there's also what I wanted to do is I had this for the first time in my life, and maybe it's because I'm older, I'm a woman and a mother, and so is she, and a wife. I had this intense desire to drive to her home and drive with, like, have a bunch of women, like every woman who knows her and loves her, gather, and all of us just wail together. I just felt like she needs to feel how my heart is breaking with her. And that if our hearts can break together and they can break loudly and openly, then the portal to grief, to good grief, to healthy, needed grief is opened. But instead, what this will turn into in our culture is she's going to have all of these logistics to deal with, dealing with the estate, the will, dealing with the funeral arrangements, dealing with, how do we communicate this to there is no organic process in our culture. And there used to be, and in some cultures there still is, but in that very stiff English upper lip way that has been spread through the English Empire during that time period, that has been taken from our culture. And I do think, again, that's sort of, that's a yin energy thing. I think that the English Empire was so successful and so powerful because it was so devoted to one side, to the yang. It was so devoted to ration, reason, aggression, and logic. And when you really commit to any one thing, as we've discussed before, in my belief, faith will move mountains, whatever that faith is in. If you have extreme faith in something very singular, that's extremely powerful. But I think it's not healthy. And I think historically cultures have, for the most part, when they haven't been grand empires, more when they've been more organic, smaller, tribal pods of people, there has been, and you see it in this book, this balance between the yin and the yang, and there's room for both. And the culture, both the men and the women, have to learn sort of how to move within both of those energies, and kind of pass through the one that might be more foreign to them without balking or rejecting, but just allowing, right? Just allowing that other energy to exist symbiotically. And we really have lost that so profoundly. And it's funny because you said last episode when we were talking about, at the end, I went off on a bit of a tangent about my own fears and the fears that I hold today about this sort of collecting of power that's happening globally, and this sort of collecting of information and authority, and how that really disconcerted me. And you said, I don't think there's like a mastermind at work behind it all. And I remember thinking I wanted to follow up with you and explain that I don't think there's a mastermind at work behind it all. I actually think what's happening is in the West, there's this awakening of yin energy. And the yin, where the yang is so hell-bent on freedom. I mean, if there's one thing that is at like the core of the English empire spread, is that English people needed to be free. And there had to be democracy, which is a form of freedom. And there had to be autonomy, which was a form of freedom. And there had to be all of these sort of pillars of freedom. Yin energy tends to be more controlling because it's a protective, nurturing energy. And to protect and nurture, there is a measure of control involved. And so, as a woman who has got a ton of yin energy, I can still see the sort of inherent wrong and danger in the yang of like the overt aggression and the over the top ration where we forget our feelings and we forget that those things matter. But there's always danger on the other side as well. And I think what I see right now is just this growing yin energy that is saying, no more of this free balling aggression. We are going to make such strict rules and structure and create such control that everyone will be safe. It's like the mom that gets a little out of hand with her helicopter parenting and kind of ruins the kids, It's that energy that I feel growing that gives me pause and makes me sort of hold my breath and go, well, hang on a minute. Let's not swing the pendulum all the way over to the yin, because what we need is just this balance, this symbiosis of them both.
Which, of course, is a fundamental part of the visual expression of yin and yang. I think that the concept is not designed to be all one on one side and all one on the other. They have to coexist to a degree in order for harmony to work, right?
And even I love that it's not just those kind of interlocking teardrops or raindrops. I see them as water, but there's also that spot in the middle, right? Yeah. The spot is so crucial because it's like right at the core of the yin, there's a piece of yang, and vice versa.
And it's crucial to the concept, isn't it? I think that's what it's all about. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things I found so enchanting about the red tent is obviously, Old Testament Israel is like very patriarchal, right? Yeah. I mean, the society is completely run by men. Women aren't even allowed to move around without the escort of a man. And yet right at the center, right at the core of it all is this tent, this private, sacred space where for 3 days women retreat into their bleeding together communally. And it is sacred and it's beautiful and it's an honoring of that time and space and that power, that beautiful, profound power that women have to bring life into the world, and the danger of that power and the way women, die in that tent giving birth, and babies die in that tent giving, coming to life, and the drama and the intensity in that. And even though it is a patriarchal culture, what I saw in this book was that those institutions were not so deeply entrenched the way they are today, so that there are these moments where, the most horrific moment in the whole book for me is the end of part 2, where Dina's Sachem is slaughtered in her arms.
Yeah.
And for me, why it was so horrific wasn't because Sachem died. I mean, we saw lots of death in this book, and death comes and goes, and it's part of the beauty of life. What was horrific for me was the awful injustice. For me, a woman dying in childbirth at that time and that place, that's not unjust. That's life, and there's a beauty and an honor to that. But this dishonorable, disgusting injustice of this murder and this death, this treason and this treachery was so it's hard for me still. I've read the book 3 times to read that chapter. It just, my stomach starts to churn and I know it's coming and I'm like, I don't want to read it. I don't want to read it. I don't like it. But then the palate cleanser that just helps me swallow the pill down and move through is immediately following that. Dina just steps into her power as basically a sorceress. She just steps into this rage, and in that rage, she accesses this autonomy and this strength and this clarity, and she just calls these curses down onto her family. And it felt like, in that moment, what we might expect out of our current concept of a patriarchy is that the patriarch would walk over, slap her silly, throw her in a tent and beat the shit out of her, or condemn her, or trap her, refuse to let her be free anymore, that she would have all of her autonomy and freedom taken from her. But instead, what happens in this story is they cower in fear.
Yeah.
Because and they feel and they know and they sense that there is a power in women that they don't possess. Yeah. And that has been lost. I don't think we, even in our beautiful efforts towards feminism today, I don't even think women are fully conceiving of what used to be, what traditionally was our female power. And for me, that's very wrapped up in spirituality.
Yeah. That's interesting that you should talk through that, because I think when you were talking about the legacy of British society and British culture throughout the empire, throughout the world, I think one of the things that really emerges from the Victorian era is in the more primal societies, there's a connectivity to the basic reality of childbirth and biology. And in the Victorian era, all of that stuff, and the sexuality is another part of this, all got buried underground. So so women aren't feeding their babies in public. People aren't talking about how the body works in public. It's all hushed up, and it's all talked about in the most euphemistic terms. People start talking about sex and sexuality in the most euphemistic terms. Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting thing. And I think to talk about that is also fascinating, because that's in terms of where the book is going, and the concepts that it examines. That's a very significant part of the book. But also, when you just look at the book in purely narrative terms, and it's purely narrative devices, it's doing exactly the same thing. It's taking a piece of history that has been recorded solely by men, in which the role of women have been downplayed to a spectacular degree. And what Anita's doing is taking this character who is literally just an afterthought, whose rape and attack and the slaughter of a maybe not partner in Genesis itself is really just designed to further this male narrative. It's all about a power struggle. It's just about illustrating that. It's the Old Testament equivalent of fridging. Are you aware of that term? Yeah. Because it's come up a lot in comic book culture, and action movie culture. But that's exactly what Dinah is in the Old Testament. And I think it's fascinating that the author has just created this entire narrative about female collectivity and connectivity, using that as the jumping off point. And I think, to arc it back to what you were saying about your friend's experience and that female grouping you were thinking of in terms of rallying around her, that's very much the way that works and the way that should work, and how important that is in our society, in human society, is the theme in this book that really, really spoke to me. Again, female connectivity and collectivity. I think it's fascinating to look at the amount of time that is spent analysing and portraying Dinah's relationships with her four mothers, not just one mother, four mothers, and they're all the different facets of the female persona. I thought that was truly fascinating.
There is a, first of all, I come from a family of three sisters. And my older sister had a daughter, and she's the only daughter. We've all given birth to boys since then. There's one girl and there's all the rest are boys. And so this is the first time I've ever read this book and been like, oh my God, I am one of the aunties. Like I am Zilpah, and my older sister is Leah and my younger sister is Rachel, and Danielle, our niece, is Dina. Like I saw those dynamics of her having been raised by all three of us, and we all had a role to play that was really specific and unique to us and important to her development. But there was a recent study. I mean, when I say recent, like within the last 20 years, that I thought was so incredible and so freeing as a woman, where they discovered that when they did the neurological examination or the initial studies on the human response to stress, and they came up with this, duality of its fight or flight. This is what the human body, the human DNA, the human biology does. It responds with hormones that create a response in humans that is either fight or flight when they're in stress. Well, they revisited and reevaluated those studies and realized that those studies, because of the time that they were done and the place that they were done, which I believe was the 1960s in America, I think, don't quote me on that, the test subjects were all men.
Yeah,
all
right.
of them.
Right.
So they were like, I wonder what would happen if we just put some women into the test and see like how that impacts the results. And what they found overwhelmingly was that men do tend to have a fight or flight response, but women overwhelmingly have a completely different response. And they said, there's a third response. There's a third biological, there's not two, there's three. And the third is tend and befriend. And the tend and befriend is group together, hear everybody out, sort of think it through together as a collective, and then decide collectively how we will act in this moment of stress, which of course is great for the historical role that women played in human culture, right? Like if you're out hunting a lion, there's no time to tend and befriend. There is not a moment, not a split second to sit, okay, what are we going to do? The lion is coming for us. He's really angry. He's going to eat all of it. Like, what do we do now? There's no time for that. You have to react with a fight or flight, right? That's what a hunter must do. But if you are essentially running the tribe, which the women did, the men were gone all the time. That was, and if they were around, they were sort of, for the most part, in most tribes, they were loungers, right? Like they were just lounging around doing a lot of nothing. And women were running the show. Yeah. Then that becomes paramount. And really, I think if you look at the original, like Greek parliament and the notion behind that, men were really adopting that tend and befriend mentality of how do we collectively gather and then make better choices than what we would make if we were just a dictator choosing from a throne. And I think that was men, very wisely, like leaning on the yin and being like, there is wisdom here, there is strength here, there is beauty here, and like we can adopt this. Anyway, that just came to mind when you were talking about the collective thing, is that third element of the human nature and how much you see it in the book that we read.
It's very interesting to hear you get into that. Something I was thinking of as you were speaking, because it touches upon, for me, some of your life experiences you've talked about before, is that Dinah's point of view in the novel is often one of an outsider, an observer within the narrative that she is walking through. Is that something that spoke? I feel like that must have been something that spoke to you and really arrested, particularly once you explained the moment that you were in when you first experienced the book. That must have had a huge piece of emotional, intellectual connectivity with you when you read it.
I'm so interested. First of all, the answer is yes, and I can dive into that. But I'm so interested as to why your instincts felt that would connect with me.
I think it's because we've spent quite a bit of time talking now, and And I think it's because quite often, you touched upon it before, which was that you actually don't keep a very busy personal life. It's quite stripped down. Yeah, which is it's something that I completely understand myself, because I know lots and lots of people, but actually I on a one-on-one basis, and my sister is always laughing about this, I'm kind of a loner, right? So I get on with everybody. I flatter myself to think I get on with everybody, but I have to spend a lot of time by myself, and I will frequently go walking or drinking or eating alone. You know, and so I always recognize the signs when I speak to fellow travelers who tick that box, you know, and that is clearly you, because enough of your anecdotes are not set in the world of, so I was in the pub with all my friends, and in the middle of that happening, this is what happened. It's always like, I was sat in this environment by myself. Yeah. You know, I was heavily pregnant and alone, and I'm happy with that. It wasn't a problem. But that's one of maybe 5 or 6 anecdotes over the time we've known each other you've told me, and it just paints that picture. And the minute I started reading this particular character, Dinah, the way that she's portrayed, I was thinking, you have to have identified with her.
It's probably unconsciously one of the reasons why I've read this book 3 times. It's the only book in the world that I've now read 3 times. I tend not to reread things once I've read them once. But I love that element to the story. And I think one of the things that is most, I was thinking this structure through at the end of this last read, because the structure is very specifically chosen. She's basically an omniscient voice, and yet the central character, which is a really interesting line artistically to walk. And, you know, she's very deft as a writer, I think, to pull it off so well. But
can I just say something? So, you know, in the last 2 episodes, the way I've been absolutely trashing the writing. This is the first book that we've examined where I've thought, oh man, okay, this is actually well written. Yeah. You know, it's come from a whole different place of technique and skill than the other books, which are a download of people's, of what people believe. In effect, this is a very different thing.
I think that's one of the reasons why I've always wanted to be a fictional writer, because I think for me, what happens in the structure and the story and the grace of the words, in the way a story can be told, in the way a story can be fabricated, in the way that dialogue is crafted, and in every period and comma and semicolon and everything that goes onto that page, are these whispers of truth that you're not being intellectually beat over the head with. And so they can sort of permeate in a much more profound way where you sense what they're saying, but you can't necessarily put your finger on it in a way that is so clear that now it's something to be disputed, right? Now it's something to like, okay, let's break this down. Like what we have done for both the previous books with the vision and conversations with God, it's almost like they're begging to be broken down and disassembled because they've been so carefully assembled like architecture. Yeah. Whereas this is more like a windstorm.
Yeah.
And
for sure.
The winds pick up and they calm down, and they caress your skin. They sort of pass through and in you and with you. And oh God, that like really, like as I said that, I was like, "Ooh, I'm feeling that." And it reminded me of when I spoke to you about ruach, the Hebrew word for spirit. Yeah. And I just briefly touched in one of our previous conversations on the word geria, which is the Hebrew word for moon, but it's a child root of ruach. They're like 2 completely connected words. They're only just differentiated by one tiny little symbol. And it's what in Hebrew we call a child root word. And to me, like that harkens again to the wisdom that used to be possessed. I think in most cultures that the moon and God and the sun and God and the stars and God, that these elements are totally interlinked. Like you can't separate God or spirit or life from these sources, these points of light and these life-giving, sort of cycle-creating, life-creating points of light. But yes, I
all of which, by the way, have to get back to the concept of, the concept of that speaks to me of the grand super complex design. All of those things you just mentioned have a tremendous amount of symmetry to them. There are patterns there's patterns in all of those things.
Yeah.
And things that if you were a scientist completely, and if you're a scientist who's completely, divorced from any kind of religious belief or philosophical belief, say you're a pure scientist, you'd look at all that stuff and just describe it in terms of all these amazingly complex patterns. So I think that's again another case of really everybody talking about the same thing but coming at it from different angles.
Well, I've always said, and I think there are people who take great offense to it, and I'm okay with that. I'm used to offending people. But I've always said that there is no such thing as a scientist who is completely divorced from religion, because the science is their religion. It's their interpretation of God, right? It's their language to express what we can't see. Like when you talk about molecules in the Middle Ages, they used to talk about how you could fit 1,000 angels on the tip of a needle point.
Yeah.
And it was always seen as so ignorant, like this really, like once there was this intellectual scientific revolution, it was such an ignorant perspective of like, oh my God, like that's ridiculous. But there are theorists who have said they believe that was the beginning of science. That was the beginning of people starting to understand that, there are atoms and molecules, like these tiny, unseen little things that if you call them angels, what you're saying is, right, they're invisible forces at work, right? And like that's essentially what an angel is, or like, and to me, like the essence of God is truth, right? It's just truth. And like we've personified truth by putting a beard on him. But like it's just truth. It's truth, and like we don't know what form that takes. We can't conceive
because truth was being personified by a bunch of dudes.
Exactly. And so when we say angels on a needle tip, or we say atoms in a petri dish, like under a microscope, we're just speaking different languages again about the same thing. So to me, there is no such thing as a non-religious person. There is no such thing as a non-believer. We just believe through different lenses.
Yeah. That absolutely speaks to me. And it's fascinating because you might have used some sentence constructions there that I wouldn't have used, like I would use some that you wouldn't, but you are saying something that absolutely speaks to me. And I feel the truth of that for sure.
Hard agree.
Hard agree indeed. Yeah. Yes. And I guess my final word on this book was I thought it was a great read. I found it to be a tremendously emotionally propulsive novel with some genuine scope, because not only do you travel from Haran, which would have been Iraq, Syria, through Canaan, into Shechem, Israel, and into Egypt, but you also make the journey through Dinah's entire life. Yeah, so it's got tremendous ambition. I actually think it is a major piece of work. And if you'd have asked me that a week ago, I would have thought, well, what this is going to be. My speculation about it would have been, sight unseen, it was going to be like The Secret, which, by the way, is a book that I do enjoy. Yeah, but I thought it was which is basically sort of self. Now we're going to get this exactly right. Yeah, it's kind of self-acclimating kind of claptrap, really, but designed to focus you on the fact that you can actually make things happen, and it touches upon what we're just the power of everything that's out there to actually yield a result in your life, which I do believe in, and that's why it speaks to me, right? But I thought that's what this was going to be, and it wasn't that at all. It's this incredibly powerful journey, through a woman's life in a particular era of society and time that's never been recorded before. And while it is a kind of speculative fiction, I think it has an incredibly powerful sort of emotional truth to it. And whether things in that time really went down that way, and I as you touched upon before, the author's certainly done a tremendous amount of research. I think the point that she's making, it doesn't really matter if it's not forensically, clinically correct, because it absolutely feels real. I think, like watching, you know, a 4K 3D movie in a massive surround cinema or something, and you spend all of that time inside of it.
Once again, it's architectural, right? It's an architectural structure that is like begging for you to deconstruct it. Like it just wants that sort of discourse. It wants you to say, where are the holes in this theory? Whereas I don't feel like what has happened in Dina's storytelling is that you're like, where are the holes? You feel like, you know, she doesn't care if it's accurate or not. That's not the point. That the point is this representation of something, that cannot be explained in an architectural sense. It needs to be lived. It needs to be felt. And where I was originally going and then completely lost my way, when I was talking about the structure of this book and the way it was created, was that I think what really stood out for me this time round was how the story begins before she's born, and this omniscient point of view that she's able to speak from, and speaks through sort of the story of her mother's. And then it carries on after her death. And you'd think, well, the story's over now, she's dead. And also, I don't know if you felt this way, but I felt quite arrested in the moment when you realize, wait, she's dying? Like the book's not over. Like how can this be happening? You know, you never hear the protagonist die. And it just carried on. And it was essentially, for me, this beautiful perspective on life, that we are more than just this moment, that we are the accumulation of the moments before us and after us. And that's such a beautiful ancient way of structuring society, where we honor our elders, we honor our children, we honor the past and the future generations. And we live now in a society that is so hell-bent on this exact moment, which is also beautiful, like being really truly in the present moment and not sort of fixating on the future and the past is, in my opinion, how we want to carry ourselves through our days. But I don't think that means wear blinders to the past and the future and disrespect and reject the past and the future as if they don't even belong to you. I think this book does a beautiful job of being completely in the present moment with Dina through her life. I mean, she is so present, but then honoring and acknowledging that she is the accumulated, you know, she is the sum of her parts. She is not just Dina. She is Dina, the daughter of, and she is Dina, the grandmother of, and that those identities are as strong as the woman, you know, just the woman herself. I'm so curious. I'm dying to know, because I kept thinking of you, of course, as I was reading it again. And there's so much intimacy in this book that I relished in. For me, it was like soul food. It's just so nourishing to read about the inner, intimate lives of women, because it is such an untapped story point. You know, there's just not a lot of story in those spaces. But I kept thinking of you and being like, I wonder if this is going to be so boring to him, because this is basically just the day in, day out, daily grind of women. I wonder if this will be uncomfortable in any way for him, because it talks so much about women's periods and you know, the birthing and like all these really intimate, sort of visceral female experiences. And I just, as a man, I'm so interested to hear your perspective reading it on what it was like to be ushered into that world.
Yes, I think it's a great question. That element of that all those huge aspects of the female experience have always been something that I've been tremendously interested in as a human being. So I was as interactive as you can be in the process of my kids being born. I'm not trying to suggest for 1 second, because I hear a lot of men talk about this. Well, I was there at the birth, like that meant they're actually doing anything of any real import, you know, and of course they're not. You know, you know, if you express as a percentage who's doing the work in a birth, it's like 100% the woman. You know, it's not the man who's sitting there being. But I was as involved as you can be in the process, and my kids were born in different ways. But also in terms of the female experience, I mean, I'm very close to my mother and my sister. I know a lot of men who are very close to their mothers and sisters, but have no connection or knowledge of the female experience whatsoever. And I'm not saying, hey man, I'm super connected to the female experience. I wouldn't presume to say that. But when I did my English degree, I went to a university college that this is in the early 80s, that had been up until the very late 70s an all-female college, right? And I started there about 2 or 3 years after they broke down all those systems. So so colleges had to be co-educational. You couldn't go and do a degree in a place where it was just men or it was just women. But it had only changed within the 2 or 3 years prior. And as a result of that, just through that, it's very different now and it's much bigger now. But at that point in the mid-80s, most of the students in that university college were female, like 99% of them.
Oh, wow.
and so I'm one of the few men in that place. Wow. And as a result, for that entire 3-year period, all of my friends, at a time when I'd had, more traditionally aligned friendships as a teenager in the 70s, all of my friends were male. All the guys I went to the cinema with were male and whatnot. But at this point in my life, it's a very interesting period for me. It was tremendously, I found it really contributed a lot to my growth as a person. And all my friends from that period of time, literally every single one of them is female. And so my entire friendship, day-to-day experience, the things that I'd be sat around kind of in the dorm room, it was me and 25 other people, all of whom were female. So the stuff that got talked about, I became very comfortable with and interested in that. While I would be at pains to say I'm not in any way trying to define that experience, because there's nothing worse than hearing, for want of a better description, a woke, contemporary male talking about the female experience like they own it and understand it. That always makes me just shake my head in disbelief. But I do feel, and I can't really explain this without using some words that could be awful bullshit buzzwords, but they happen to be true. I've always been sort of very empathic about. I think I've always been able to connect with women very easily, and that definitely is born of that period of time in my life. I mean, it must have been inside me, but definitely what unlocked it was being in a place where for 3 years everybody I knew was female, and and because I don't have, I come from a family of people who love sports, for example. But I'm the black sheep. I'm not interested in sports. Yeah, I love the fact that they love sports, and I love the camaraderie of sports, right? But the idea of me sitting down and watching a soccer match or a rugby match or a US football match or a baseball match, apart from taking my dad to games, which I do every now and again, I would just never do that. I can't watch that stuff without falling asleep. So therefore, it's not even like I was in this all-female environment, but every now and again, I used to nip out to the pub twice a week and watch the football game and get a fix of my male camaraderie. I had zero male camaraderie for a 3-year period. So I think that just gave me this grounding and fascination with the female experience in life. So that's how it. So I was very comfortable reading about that. And I think that's why I was so excited about it when I was talking to you earlier on. I think the reason I got I found this very, supremely propulsive, and it really spoke to me on an emotional level. I think it was for those reasons, probably.
I'm telling you, you and I are like the mirror image of one another. Like we are like the two sides of a coin. Do you know what I mean? In that so much of what we've experienced is so similar, just like the flip of it. And I found myself through high school and college also just being always with guys. Always. I was always the one token female in a group of guys. And I just spent so much of my late teen and early adult years in that space. And it just continued on when I started my acting career. I mean, working on Lost, I was always working with men. I think the first time I started to feel like, I get to actually work with one of my female co-stars on a semi-regular basis was when Elizabeth Mitchell entered the show as Juliet. And then her and I would cross paths a little more than I had with the other women. I had like a split second in season 1 where Yoonjin Kim and I got to spend some time working together, and that was just heaven. But both of those women, that for me, that was like, this is amazing. But mostly I spent all my time working with men. And of course, a film set is this crazy testosterone-filled, sausage fest. It's just dudes everywhere.
Of course.
So few women on a film crew. And then moving on to The Hobbit, I literally didn't have a single scene with another woman.
Yeah.
And so moving into the Marvel universe was, again, a bunch of dudes.
Yeah, of course.
One, and it's just like carried. And then finally, Ant-Man and the Wasp was the first time when they brought Michelle Pfeiffer in, where I actually had a little bit more interaction with, and even Cassie, the little girl. I liked her. But I've spent the bulk of my adult life surrounded by men, and to a certain degree, just like you described, organically sort of adopting and feeling very comfortable in their spaces, very much being able to like keep up with the banter and the crudeness and the sort of irreverence and play that game, right? Like riff with that space. And then I think on another level, and I don't know if you felt any of it, but I also had there was a certain amount of it being forced. There was a certain amount of being empathic and just I had an understanding and I felt a natural rapport. And then there was another side of it that was like, if you can't hang with the dudes, you're not cool, right? That in a patriarchal society has historically been the case. Like the one woman who is lucky enough to get to hang out with the guys is like, because she's the coolest girl in the group. And that bullshit has created, such a rift in women between each other and then between themselves as well. And I maybe I'm wrong, but I imagine that you maybe didn't feel that.
You imagine that completely correctly. Yeah, that's right, because it serves the patriarchy's purpose to sow that kind of dissension. We're going to pick you out and you're going to be one of us. And that dissension among women that's fostered by a lot of that male bullshit, that works, that helps the patriarchy, right? In its traditional sense. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not going to say another word because I'm aware that it's.
The clock. No, we've done it again. The clock is ticking. So but again, that was a very interesting closing digression, which did absolutely connect to the core of what we were discussing with the Red Tent by Anita Diamant or Anita Diamant, whichever Anita she is. I think this is for me, this has been far and away as a book in and of itself, as a piece of art. I think this has been the most successful reading experience. I think it's a genuinely accomplished novel. So I really
apologize in advance then, Andrew, because we're going back to male authors for the next 2 months. So we're getting right back into the architectural sense of reality. And you have to bear with me and just strap in for the ride. This was your oasis in the desert, and it's over.
It's perfectly landed right in the middle as well, as every oasis should do. So we fed the camels, we've watered the camels, we've cooked some food over an open fire, we've slept under the stars. And next week, for those of you listening and want to check this book out, we will be moving away from the oasis, climbing the dunes once more, and embracing the presence process.
By Michael Brown.
The presence process by Michael Brown.
Strap in, it's a good one.
And what would be your 1 or 2 line précis of what this book is going to be?
Oh gosh. So actually
I know I'm asking you, a super verbose person, to come up with that in 1 or 2 lines, but
this will be my challenge to do it very quickly. Well, basically in the journey that I'd taken so far through the vision, the conversations with God and the Red Tent, my heart and mind had been open to a broader sense of spirituality than I had been raised within the church. And now the struggle became, how do I apply that? There's no church that teaches this. There's no Sunday school to go to. There's no preacher at the pulpit every Sunday to say, okay, this new path you're on, this is how you do it. And I needed guidance, and I wanted practical applications for a broader spiritual perspective. And that became the presence process. And the presence process is literally, as the name suggests, a process. So it's kind of a how-to. And it's very, very intense. So if you plan on reading it, I'm not sure if you plan on doing it, but I would say try it. And because I've done it 4 times now, And every time I've had a completely different experience, but none of them have been uneventful. They have all been intense and incredible, and have essentially given me a practice that I've now carried on for 6 years.
Wow. Okay. Well, on that bombshell, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm gonna check it out tonight. I'm gonna start doing it, and let's see what kind of physical shape I'm in by the time we meet again in a week's time.
I can't wait. It's all getting very juicy now.
I love it. That's brilliant. So, brains, this has been Hard Degree presents Evangeline Lilly's Library of the Soul. We've been talking about Magnificent Red Tent this week. We're going to be back in a week's time for the presence process, and let's hope I'm the same in a week's time as I am now. Or maybe I've been changed now in a glorious and magnificent way.
Oh, it's been great as always, Andrew.
Great to see you, pal. You take care of yourself. I'll see you soon.
Bye now.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to Hard Degree. This episode was edited by John Horsley and Kenrick Regan, and our theme music, Golden, was written and performed for this show by Liverpool's finest band, Denio. Hard Degree is a production of the Spoilerverse and myself, Andrew Sumner.